you knock it off right now, it's gone! Moshahidi with room, launches! Kaboom! From another time zone. This is comical, cartoonish, and downright ridiculous. Hey, welcome back for Season 2, Episode 19 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Last week, I raved and ranted all at the same time about the Home Run Derby and the MLB All-Star Game. Then the Chiefs reset the market for guards with Trey Smith's mega deal. And we were wrapped up with a couple of deals for some likely future Hall of Famers. TJ Watt is staying in Pittsburgh, probably for the rest of his career, and Dame Lillard is coming back home to Portland. And this week, we are less than 1 week away from the NFL Hall of Fame game and the sort of start of the season, so you know we have to have Fantasy Football Friday. To me, the big kahunas of the draft are often quarterbacks. I'm one of not so many people that thinks that, I think. And I know it'll be almost exclusively receivers and running backs off the board for the first couple of rounds, and obviously Justin Jefferson, Saquon Barkley, Jamar Chase, those were all league winners last year. That said, there are tons of viable options at quarterback, but I like to take them a little bit higher than other people. Why not lock in one of the best you can get a little bit earlier and then never have to think too much about their matchups week to week? To that end, let's rank my top 5 fantasy quarterbacks for 2025. I don't really think what have you done for me lately is the most crucial factor to picking the top fantasy quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield was the 5th highest scoring fantasy player at any position in 2024, and he had career highs across the board, stats he had never approached before in his whole career. Sam Darnold was the same way with Minnesota. Patrick Mahomes was outside of the top 10 for quarterbacks, and not just all players, that's outside of the top 10 just for quarterbacks. Do you really think that's going to be the case again this year? Does that make a whole lot of sense? Probably not. A full career of excellence is really compelling, but one big year is kinda not. That's gonna guide the top of this list big time. And so my number 1 fantasy quarterback, the big reveal for 2025, it's the reigning MVP, Josh Allen. A lot of people are going to pick Lamar Jackson, and rightfully so. The one reason I won't is because Josh is becoming one of the most consistent quarterbacks in the league. Unfortunately, not on a real game-to-game basis, but year-to-year throughout his career. He hasn't missed a game due to injury since his rookie year, despite the most aggressive running style of any quarterback. He has at least 40 total touchdowns between rushing and passing for 5 straight years, quite unsurprisingly the only guy to ever do that in league history, and that will absolutely continue this year. And he's been QB1 in fantasy for 3 of those past 5 years, including back-to-backs in 2020 and 21. The one big leap that he took in 2024 was protecting the ball. The year prior, he threw 18 interceptions. That was a massive number, but he cut that all the way down to 6 this year. This is not the most interesting, it's not the hottest take you'll hear at all, but it is an almost guaranteed top 3 player at the position. In deep leagues, quarterback can wait a little bit longer, but if you have something like 8 or 10 players like I'm planning to have in my leagues, the 3rd or 4th round is probably when I'm going to start targeting Josh Allen. My number 2 fantasy QB isn't going to be super fun or controversial either. It's the MVP runner-up and the top scoring player overall in fantasy last year, the Ravens' Lamar Jackson. The reason he's not number 1 is because I don't think his numbers from last year are replicable. I think that was a singular season in NFL history, and I don't even think he can do it again. How many quarterbacks have had a season with 40 total touchdowns, just passing, and 4 or fewer interceptions in a season? Only Lamar. Peyton Manning never did that. Tom Brady, even with the 07 Patriots, never did that. Not even Aaron Rodgers. And on top of that, Lamar is already the greatest rushing quarterback ever. He threw for 4,000 yards for the first time in his career. He ran for another 915, 45 total touchdowns, even beating out Josh Allen to lead the league. The one thing to be wary of is touchdown regression with Lamar. What that means is he threw touchdowns on 8.6% of all of his passes last year, which led the league by leaps and bounds, and it is highly, highly unlikely that he can repeat that kind of rate. For context, Joe Burrow was 2nd in touchdown rate at 6.6%. My number 3 fantasy QB for 2025, it's someone I was down on before last year started, but I still ended up drafting in around the 5th or the 6th round in one of my leagues. I can't recall exactly. Shame on me. Joe Burrow would have won MVP if it were a normal year, if it weren't for Lamar and Josh Allen just putting on their capes and playing superheroes. You lead the league in completions, attempts, yards, touchdowns, and complete over 70% of your passes. You are supposed to win MVP. It's just how badly the Bengals defense sold him that held him back. He was the 4th highest scoring player in all of fantasy last year. Yes, Joe Burrow scored more fantasy points than Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, or Jahmyr Gibbs. Unbelievable. I dinged him among my draft targets last year because of what I perceived as his lack of rushing ability, forgetting that he is blessed with one of the strongest and maybe the most accurate arm the league has ever seen. Yes, Aaron Rodgers would like to have a word, but watch the tape from last year and certain throws just take your breath away. As long as the Bengals defense is still pretty porous, Joe is going to have to carry a tremendous workload every single week, and how much more needs to be said about their offensive weapons. Reigning Triple Crown receiver Jamar Chase and one of the best number 2s in the league, T. Higgins, both extended for the next 4 years. Yikes. Put that all together, and I love Joe Burrow for this year. I feel super good about my top 3, but there's always room for error with injuries, game scripts, offensive philosophies, or sometimes just coordinator changes. My number 4 fantasy quarterback for 2025, I think many people are going to have Jalen Hurts here. And that's partly because the tush-push survived the potential ban, and he's going to score a whole bunch of touchdowns on that. But I tell you what, I want Jaden Daniels here with the Commanders. The rushing value between him and Hurts is actually quite similar, and in fact, I'm struggling to figure out how Hurts rushed for 14 touchdowns, almost all via the tush-push, and still was only QB 8 in the league. I think Jaden Daniels was the consensus best rookie quarterback of all time, when you factor in his own rushing, with 891 yards and 6 touchdowns, then 3,500 yards and 25 touchdowns through the air. Hurts has a dramatically better team around him, and yet the Commanders scored more total points than the Eagles did. It should be noted Hurts only played 15 games to Daniels' full 17. I still don't really fear a sophomore slump from a guy that started 5 years in college and was a day 1 starter in the NFL. The lights have never been too bright for him. The Commanders' Jaden Daniels in here at number 4. Rounding out my top 5 is a very tough choice. I'm going to leave off some other great QBs and break the rule I think that I mentioned about the what have you done for me lately, because give me Baker Mayfield. What did I just say a few minutes ago with Baker, though? He was the 5th highest scoring player in the entire league in fantasy. The Bucs offense was great, and it starts but does not end with him, and I think that that's crucial too. He has a really strong offense all around him. They were 4th in scoring, 3rd in total yards, 4th in passing yards, and they returned pretty much every contributor from last year. I've mentioned this before on the show, but Chris Godwin, their supposed number 2 receiver on paper, though he's really a lot more like a number 1, he was on a crazy pace before he got hurt in week 7. He dislocated his ankle in that game. Before that, he had over 500 yards and 5 touchdowns in 6 games. Now the news out of Bucs training camp is that Godwin had 2 surgeries on that ankle in the offseason. One was a little bit closer to the start of camp, and he's going to start on the physically unable to perform list as the preseason draws closer. This ranking for Baker somewhat assumes that Godwin is on the field for week 1, but his numbers were almost identical with Godwin off the field after week 7 last year. The Bucs had tons of other players step up. They had their top running backs, Bucky Irving and Rashad White, who combined for almost 800 yards receiving. Cade Otton had a great breakout at tight end. He had a 7-game stretch with 413 receiving yards in the middle of the season. And of course, Mike Evans is one of the most consistent players the league has ever seen at receiver, with another ho-hum 1,000-yard and 11 touchdown season. Beyond all the talent around him, I love Baker's killer instincts, and I trust him to repeat those career best numbers from last year more than I would trust most other quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield in here at number 5. So those are my top 5 fantasy quarterbacks for 2025. If you can't get any of these 5, I wouldn't panic, because there will be other viable options every single week. I won't make a big formal honorable mention list, but it would be composed of the same players that it normally is. Kyler Murray, he's got great, combined rushing and passing ability. Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes. Jared Goff has an insanely, unbelievably loaded offense all around him, right? Justin Herbert is a stud. start thinking hard about a quarterback by round 4 or so, but especially in deeper leagues, if it slides a little and one of these guys falls to you in the later rounds, that's perfectly fine. If you do get one of these 5, you'll have a little bit of a leg up on your league and some easier lineup decisions, at least at QB. Now, the second half or so of this episode, we're going to talk about a few MLB trade deadline names to watch and predict where they'll land. I'll never get many of these right, but it's always worth a shot, and it's fun to dive into as the division races heat up. The trade deadline is this coming Thursday, July 31st at 6 p.m. This week, there's probably going to be a few trades trickling in, but the last 48 hours or so before the deadline, that's when that dam bursts. That's when pretty much the entire league landscape changes in a couple of days. I've been chewing on the number 1 name for a while now, and the guy continues to absolutely mash and drive his price tag up and up and up. I am talking about Eugenio Suarez, the Diamondbacks' third baseman. He is in the midst of another insanely productive season, and he's on the way to a bunch of career bests. Most importantly, he has 36 home runs and 86 RBI at time of recording. He is the biggest bat that's available, as he would be in most years. The only thing holding back his value is probably his age. He turned 34 last week, and almost no one's prime continues beyond that point. He was an All-Star for only the second time in his 12-year career this year. By the way, in the All-Star game, he made a fantastic barehanded pick and throw, and I can't remember who hit that ground ball to him, but I thought, man, I didn't know his glove was like that. He's one of the least celebrated 300 home run hitters I can ever remember, but he just rakes. Third baseman's offensive production is down across the league, which leaves a ton of really good fits for him. The Yankees have said they're going to, quote, go to town at the deadline, as they need to put themselves in position to catch the Blue Jays in the AL East. The Tigers have been in an absolutely heinous offensive stretch, kind of sandwiching the break, having lost 9 of their last 10 and seeing that division lead getting cut. The Mets and the Cubs have been both linked to Suarez, and they've gone through multiple bodies at third base themselves without any good offensive results. And finally, he had a 2-year stint with the Mariners where he hit 53 home runs and was worth 6.5 wins above replacement. Now, I will close my eyes, throw a dart, and I will say he lands with the Yankees. Being a fan, of course, I want him in Detroit, but I recognize that the Yankees are going to be willing to give up more current big league value as opposed to prospects. There's going to be a lot of farm systems that get drained and added to, depending on which side of the ledger your team is on, but New York has a farm system ranked close to the bottom and a big league roster that, although they lean heavily on Aaron Judge to sort of play the Barry Bonds role, also has a ton of good proven veterans. Plus, Suarez has been criminally underpaid actually his whole career, and you very rarely say that about stars and guys who hit a ton of home runs. But this year he's making the most he ever has at $15 million. My 2 other destinations I could see him picking are, of course, Detroit. He did start his career there, and Seattle, again because he's familiar with both cities and organizations. The Diamondbacks are 10 games back in their division, and there is no way Suarez is wearing their uniform a week from now. Next up is a starting pitcher, the Royals' Seth Lugo. No one besides the Tigers in the AL Central have really done much right this year, in a not good division. The White Sox, the Royals, the Guardians, they are all in the bottom 5 in the league in runs scored. KC's starting pitching is their one bright spot, but that's just not going to stay intact for a team that's 10 games back in the division and 3 games under 500. Their top 3 starters, Chris Bubich, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha. Very, very solid top 3. Wacha is the quote-unquote worst of the 3 with a 2.2 WAR and a 3.62 ERA. That is to say they could be doing much worse. Lugo's a 10-year veteran, he's 35 years old, and I totally forgot this by the way, but he finished second to Tarek Skubal in the AL Cy Young vote last year. Lugo is the most likely one to get moved out of those 3, as he's the oldest and he could parlay all the great work that he's done the last year and a half or so. In the middle of his career, this guy wasn't even a starter, and then to come out of nowhere last year, put up a 3 ERA, eat innings, win a Gold Glove, that was absurd. He has a 7-5 record right now with a 2.95 ERA, so he could certainly deal with a change of scenery. The top contenders that need right-handed starting pitching are, as I see it, probably the Blue Jays, the Cubs, and perhaps the Astros. Any of those are solid options, and they're legit World Series contenders right now. Funny enough, Seth Lugo might not be the best available starter in his own division. That title would go to the Twins' Joe Ryan. Minnesota is below even KC in the Central standings, and they are too talented to be fourth in such a weak division. Joe Ryan has a 2.63 ERA. He's among the league leaders in pretty much everything else, too. 10.2 strikeouts per nine, 5.74 strikeouts per walk, 4.5 wins above replacement, all for a team that's 10.5 games back of the Tigers and 4.5 games back of the third wild card. I wouldn't want to part with him either if I were Minnesota, but it's been a career year for him, so they kind of need to get everything they can out of him. I could see this being the biggest prospect haul of the entire deadline. Where he lands is kind of anybody's guess. I think as of today, you have the Milwaukee Brewers with the best record in the league at 61-41. They could be in play. I don't think he would go within the division. Obviously, you'd like to say, oh, Detroit could bolster their rotation, but I don't expect that. Maybe Houston's in there too. It's tough to say, but I could see a ton of good teams calling on Joe Ryan. My final fish that needs frying is Aroldis Chapman. You might remember that last year he set the record for most career strikeouts by a left-handed reliever. And now he's in the middle of the best season of his career at 37. Also, he still throws a four-seam and a sinker that average almost 100 miles an hour, plus a good slider and splitter. Lowest ERA of his career at 1.34, lowest walk rate at 6.6%, and he has 60 strikeouts in 40 in the third innings. In a word, he is untouchable. He might just be a half-year rental too, but he is still amazing. He's currently with the Red Sox, which is his 7th team, but I expect him to join an 8th at the deadline this year. The only issue is, Boston is 6 games back of Toronto, not a real daunting deficit, and they have the third wild card spot if the season ended today, so they can't really afford to gut their whole roster. They might be tempted to hold on to all their veterans and just raid their minor league system. Detroit is in play, as their bullpen has just really imploded during this rough patch. The Mets have their own elite closer, Edwin Diaz, and are still probably in play because of how specialized relief pitching is and how rare lefties are that allow like a 150 average to both right and left-handed hitters. One of them would probably just have to shift to the 8th inning for setup. I think any trade would be contingent on the Red Sox having a really bad week and falling out of that last wildcard spot, so this might be a long shot. However, he is one of the best relievers of all time, still somehow getting better, and is one of the great mercenary players where he just continues to switch teams and dominate everywhere. I think he would be one of the biggest splash moves among all bullpen arms. A few quick disclaimers on these. Other big names are of course going to be moved. I wanted to talk about others, but it's a weekly show and I don't want every episode to be an hour long if it doesn't have to be. Paul Skeens is not going anywhere for any reason, by the way, and I don't want to predict that he will be a Pirate for life, but he has had the best 44 start stretch to begin a career of all time ever. It's not even close. You usually don't say a second-year pitcher is a surefire Hall of Famer, but there is nothing usual about that guy. And Tarek Skubal is not going anywhere either. Fun fact, he's currently on the paternity list, and now with 2 kids and a wife, there is no chance he's going to be uprooting his life and moving somewhere. I believe he still lives in Arizona in the offseason, but Detroit is now home for him too, no matter how long the team wants to draw out that stupid contract extension situation. It just makes my skin crawl, right? But both Skeens and Skubal are probably going to win the Cy Youngs this year. At least they're the favorites. And soon enough, they will sign the 2 biggest contracts for starting pitchers in history, as they should. So, another week down. This week, I'm going to start putting the link in the description on Spotify for the next powerlifting stream I'm doing. I also have 2 more meets after that on the calendar this year to commentate and one to compete in. And I'll try to remember to link everything every time. No promises on that, but I'll do my best. Check out all my socials, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, at The Voice of Tanner, X, just Voice of Tanner, YouTube, the whole thing spelled out. Leave a like, comment, and share, and I'll catch you next week. This has been Season 2, Episode 19 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, no.
Oh, you knock it off right now. It's gone. Mo Shahidi with room launches. Kaboom! From another time zone. This is comical, cartoonish, and downright ridiculous.